I think Europe has woken up. They realize that they are behind on the tech ecosystem. I think Europe realized that US is taking care of the US, especially today. And if Europe wants to have their own independency on the technology, Europe should take care of Europe.
Hi folks, James here, and welcome to the Spiro Circle, this time in collaboration with Forbes Israel. So many Israeli founders look to expand their business outside of Israel. Of course they do. It's a small country, small population, and there's a whole world out there. Now, 9 times out of 10, those founders are going to look at North America or the US as a potential market outside of Israel. But there's also a whole other continent just down the road, Europe. Now, say what you will about Europe, we know the tropes, that it's heavily regulated, that it's slow, that it doesn't innovate. But over the years, it's actually becoming quite a hub for tech ecosystems in different countries, and especially with things like cybersecurity and AI. So I spoke to Planven VC. They're a VC fund based out of Switzerland, but offer some form of kind of bridge between Israeli companies and European investors. I spoke to its managing partner, specifically Eran Westman, all about this. We spoke about the ecosystems, we spoke about the connections and the relationships, and we also kind of addressed the elephant in the room, which is the rising levels of anti-Semitism felt across the continent and whether or not that translated into day-to-day activity or business practices. Anyway, our conversation scoped all kinds of topics, and it really was interesting for me to hear all about different things that take place in that continent. I hope you enjoy. Eran, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
I have a lot of different discussion points I want to address with you today, because I think it's a really interesting time to be talking about some of the investment opportunities and in different parts of the world. But what I want to do first is basically paint a bit of a picture to where Planven is exactly. So you folks operate as somewhat of a bridge between the Israeli tech ecosystem and the European tech ecosystem through investment opportunities. Talk me through a bit about what you guys do and why that bridge exists right now.
Excellent, thank you. So Planven is a European fund, so headquartered in Zurich, that since inception invested across this bridge, if you want to use this expression, meaning investing in both Europe and in Israel. In a way, it gives European investors, which is our investors, the LPs, predominantly European, access to the best of breed. So if I take you for our investment process, in most cases, we develop together with our network, either our CISO advisory board when it comes to cyber or healthcare advisory board when it comes to healthcare and other domains. Probably 2-3 times a year we have those sessions and we say what are the main points or main pain points that you as a potential customer are having, what do you see in the market. We have venture partners that are part of our decision making, and here we go with some domains that we want to focus on. Then we map the industry and we look for specific company in those specific domains. So together with the team that we are working, we develop the theme, the subdomain, let's call it, that we want to look. Let's take an example. Within cyber, we want to look at non-human identity. And then we will map all companies that we see that are acting in this domain, can be in Munich, Paris, Barcelona, Zurich, Tel Aviv. And then we start to look, okay, some are not relevant for us. They are all technology, too big, too small, whatever. And we identify those that we want to focus on. And this is where we make the decision. It can be a company in Europe. It can be a company in Israel. This is one aspect of us bridging the gap. I think the second one, which is as important, if not more, In Israel, very often, or almost in most cases, due to the size of the market, founders here are very quickly going outside. And in 99.9 of the cases, they are going to the US or after the US market, very obvious, larger software market, larger security market, healthcare by far the largest. So it makes a lot of sense. When those founders or CEO look what I will do when I'll be big and I will be running a large company, they very quickly understand that at that stage, 30 to 40% of their business should come from Europe. Europe is difficult in many ways, many languages, many cultures. Regulation is much stiffer, especially when we speak about some of the domains that we discussed, security or healthcare. Distribution, it's much more indirect sales via channel rather than direct, like very often happening in the US. And you need help. And this is where we come into play, that we can help Israeli companies with our own experience, but definitely with the network that we have, both of our venture partners that are in Europe and with the networks of CISOs or healthcare experts that we have, or CIOs, and help the company to start the first steps into Europe and bridge this gap or, let's say, difficulties. And this is one side. If I just complete, then when we look at Europe, actually the bridge we are doing is that we're bringing a lot of the knowledge, expertise that the tech ecosystem in Israel have built over the last, 35 years, and try to implement it in Europe. In Europe is not short of talent or smart people, a good education. In some place, it's short of the knowledge of how to build a big company. Some European are very comfortable from the right reason to stay in their own turf. And we encourage them, if you want to be top 3, 5 companies in the world in your domain, you must active globally and definitely cannot ignore the US market.
No, thank you. That was a great overview and a great kind of setting the context for the call today and what we're going to discuss, because it's interesting the way you outlined those things, because Israeli founders and Startup Nation and all of the things that have been coming from the last 35 years, as you said, the founders are always looking out immediately, right? They're always looking for the next big place to go. And you said that concept doesn't quite translate to Europe. They're very kind of happy and comfortable operating in the space they are in. So when you guys are there in this kind of one foot in each domain, not domain, but kind of territory. Thank you. Territory. What are some of the ways that the two cultures, the startup nation versus the EU, Europe, what are some of the ways that those complement each other, but also maybe contrast? Like, because we're not so far away from each other, we're certainly closer than the US, but there seems to be these frictions that you outlined with culture and language and currencies. So how do they work together? Because that can be intimidating for Israelis.
For sure. So first, obviously, everything I say is a general statement and there are exceptions for everything we said. But as you rightly said earlier, some of the European founders and CEO, you can say comfortable, but on the other hand, some of the countries in Europe are very large. You can build a technology company in Germany, stay in the German market and build it to a size, which probably you cannot do in Israel. 10 million versus close to 100 plus. Other countries, 70, 60, 80 million inhabitants, that's enough to build a company. And then, okay, if you are feeling that Germany is already saturated, okay, I go to Switzerland, to Austria, they speak German, I'm very easy, then maybe I go to the neighboring countries. So nothing wrong with it. It has to do with our inspiration, because if we are investing in a company, we believe that good returns will come for the companies that will be on the top of the list. Sometimes it's 1, 2, sometimes it's 1 to 5, sometimes even broader, but it's probably will not be to a company that did very well in the German market. They will not be on the global map. Okay, when Gartner will make a mapping of the Magic Quadrant, they will not be on the top right. Very unlikely. And this is very important for us to bring, as you said, bridging. The way things are done in Israel, that I would say you will very unlikely find a founder that want to stay to run his business in Israel only. This is what we are looking or advising. We can come to a company that so far did business only in Europe. If we see that there is a match between our idea how doing business and their inspiration, then they just did not do it because of capital raise or so far the connection, the investor they had. This is the time that we are having this heart-to-heart conversation and checking basically whether those guys are ready to take the world or are willing to stay with their own small turf. So I think this is a very important, most likely in our first conversation that we will do. And just again for the Israelis founders, some will want to focus only on the US because the product is now more catered to the US market. They don't want to defocus for the go-to-market activities. It's all good, but at a certain time they will need to go to Europe. It's hundreds of millions of people, that good economies, and they cannot ignore it. So when the time is right, and every company may be in a different stage, we are there to help, and we have a lot of examples of how we help companies to be successful in Europe.
It's a bit intimidating because I agree with you, right? You can't ignore Europe. You can't ignore any potential market. Like any company that wants to grow has every geography in mind. So of course Europe is one of them. But it's a bit intimidating to begin the leap into Europe. Am I wrong, or am I? I don't know. Like it might be a bit more comforting to start in a country that, I mean, America is very different and it has 50 states, but it's still kind of one national language, one currency. Even the UK could be a step. So what do you mean? What do you say to the founders that are maybe a bit anxious to start that jump into Europe?
Okay. So first, there are a lot of markets. I spent 5 years of my life in Singapore building a business from zero to hundreds of millions of dollars in Asia. It can be done. But we look in terms of concentration of big population, and after the US, Europe is actually larger in population, but I think definitely the second biggest economy in the world. And it doesn't give you the complication of dealing with China or India, also the distance. So we have to remember that Israel to Europe is a few hours flight, depends to which part. So that's make it much easier and simpler. For those that are so-called intimidated by going to Europe, this is how we are trying to help, either by introduction of the right people, go-to-market people that we recommend. We have a couple that are working with us as a venture partners, but we know a big network of others. The right partners, and also priorities, because I'm a big believer. I spent a big part of my career running go-to-market teams. I'm a big believer in focus, so I will not say to any entrepreneur, go to Europe. It's tens of countries, and some are very different from others in terms of obviously the economy, but also in terms of the regulation. So company by company should figure out which is the right part of Europe for them to start with and expand from there.
Yeah, definitely. And maybe I would give some unsolicited advice that maybe start with a Eurozone country. So at least you get the currency down.
Yeah, that's for sure. I think this is okay. And also you have regulation that are EU. So once you, let's say, you do something that require regulation approval, at least you do it and you have it now for all Eurozone. But that's definitely correct. And there is a lot of, then you will find distributors that are active in actually multiple countries within Eurozone. So it's a very good advice.
I want to speak now, or I want to hear now, a bit more about the investor funding ecosystem in Europe, because a lot of the people that listen or watch this show probably are quite familiar with Startup Nation and Israel and how this ecosystem is kind of structured and how all of the pieces play together. But one of the things that's a bit striking about Europe and the EU is that a lot of these early seed stage companies, in terms of these entrepreneurial boosts of innovation, quite a lot of them are backed or somewhat backed by government programs or initiatives. that are being launched by the individual countries. What can you tell me a bit about some of those setups and how they may differ from what people may traditionally understand about early stage investing?
Okay. So I'll focus now a little bit more on the Eurozone, actually, what you mentioned, because I think UK and maybe some of the Nordics are a little bit of a different animal. I think UK tech ecosystem is quite mature. But when we go to the Eurozone and some of the big countries, Germany, France, Italy, Spain, I think it's a little bit different. Obviously, again, I'm giving a general statement, and there are others that are not fitting the general or the average. But first, I think that it's very important to people to understand about the opportunity. I think Europe has woken up. I think they realize that they are behind on the tech ecosystem. They did also a report for the EU called the Draghi report, made by the gentleman called Draghi, who spoke about productivity of the EU. And one of the main reasons that Europe is behind the US in productivity is the adoption of technology. So there is a big push, let's say, by the EU and then the respective governments to encourage more investment in technology. I think also, without going to any political views, I think Europe realized that US is taking care of the US, especially today. And if Europe wants to have their own independency on the technology, it can be also, of course, in defense and other aspects, Europe should take care of Europe. With that in mind, there is a lot of money flowing from the European Union and the sovereign funds of the different countries into the technology, mainly indirectly. And this is what is basically what you said. A lot of the venture capitals firms or funds in Europe are in their LPs, or sometimes very significant, are the sovereign funds, the government agencies that are providing money as LPs. That creates, in many cases, a lot of very domestic view. So you will create a German fund that is focused on Germany, and Swiss on Switzerland, and etc. When we come to Italy, Spain, and the other countries in the Eurozone. The second thing that it's create is a lot of people are very ambitious to create a VC fund, and if the government give money, it's maybe not a bad thing to do. So you will see some funds that I would not say the only investor is the sovereign fund, but a very significant part of it is coming from there. And then also many of them are focusing on the very early stage. So if I take now a zoom out and say, after everything that I described, what is missing? So you're missing funds that are looking across Europe. Remember, in the beginning of our conversation, I said that when we are looking for a company in a certain domain, we are looking across Europe and Israel, but now we're speaking about Europe. So we look across Europe. You will not look at Italy only, or France only, or Germany only. We will look across the Eurozone or across the continent. You are missing investors that are doing later stage. So when you do seed, you will see that there are many investors. As long as you go up the rounds, less and less. And therefore, you see that in some way similar to Israel, when you go to the very successful companies on the later rounds, you will see some of the US flagship funds that are taking a major part of the investment. So those are the, let's call it the voids in the ecosystem. I think it's catching up because you see by the number of companies that are being created that significantly went up in the last years. Still, I think that what it's missing is also the fund that push the companies to go global, as connecting it again about the bridge, the narrative in the Israeli ecosystem, go big, conquer the world. It's less of, let's say, of the normal when you speak about European investment. And to go back to our small little fund, this is where we are trying to make the difference. So we are not interested in those that are trying to be domestic. We are going global. I'll give you maybe a funny story. I used to live I used to live very long time in New York, and one of my favorite restaurants is a restaurant called Daniel Boulod. This is the chef called Daniel. And a few weeks ago, we spoke with a company from Lyon, a cyber company from Lyon, that actually very interesting technology, doing well, but kept their headquarters in Lyon. I would say 90% of the businesses in France. So I told the CEO, Daniel Boulod also came from Lyon, but he became famous when he got a few restaurants in New York, Asia, Emirates, this kind of places, and London, and not by staying in Lyon. And the CEO felt comfortable with he's doing a business in France. Maybe okay, we'll expand. He will go a little bit to Spain or maybe the neighboring countries. And I think this is the major change that needs to happen in the ecosystem. Europe did it with some companies in consumer, in direct-to-consumer business. There are some very great success from Europe on this front. Not enough on the B2B business.
That's a great story, and that's such a personable and tangible way of getting your point across, because it's like the restaurant, it's the idea of breaking bread, it's sitting around the table, it's also the guy, right? He's like the face of the idea as well as the business itself. But I do want to kind of try and credit the EU and Europe generally for some of the efforts it's doing really in its AI push, because there's been a kind of reputation of like the EU versus America, where one is innovating and the other one is regulating. And I feel that in some ways that's fair, but in some ways that's also not fair, because I feel that maybe there's an angle of responsibility that the EU has that maybe other cultures doesn't have, the move fast, break things kind of innovation and entrepreneurship. So I do want to credit the EU for its pushes, that it knows it needs to kind of play catch up a bit, and it's doing so in a way in areas like AI and some of these companies that are really showing cool stuff. What are some of the challenges in working in traditionally more of a regulatory environment? Because the EU wants to catch up and is doing what it can, but it still is very focused on individual privacy and rights and GDPR, and it really does, in some ways, it really innovates in the protections that need to be put in place with new tech. So I always say that the EU may regulate, but through that regulation sometimes comes innovation, which I think is like a paradoxical idea.
It's like I say, every new technology bring another cyber threat and another cyber companies. Obviously, if you technology company and you need to operate and regulation put a limitation, you need to make lemonade out of the lemons and try to bring a product that either fix the regulation, enforce the regulation, or act within the regulation, because this is the regulation. We can like it, we cannot like it. That's the reality. I think that obviously the tech ecosystem in a way dislike the regulation because it hinders some of the efforts. But if we give credit to Europe, some of the regulation that were enforced many years ago, adopted also in the US. I would say California GDPR is not significantly behind Europe.
Well, I was going to say it was followed by CCPA in California, and then once it landed in America, it dripped down to other states.
Exactly. So I think that there are regulation that makes sense. Sometimes you can be overprotective, but that's the nature of governments that are more conservative in a way, and Europe is more conservative from the US. We are not the first to acknowledge it. But I think that within the regulation, Europe also tried to give the ability to innovate. I think that two things that people might underestimate is the fact that Europe has great universities. I don't think that they are fall behind of universities, and I think number of engineers is not falling short of the US. And this is something that people need to remember. Again, we spoke about some of the inspiration, and we say in Hebrew chutzpah that is maybe missing, but I think in terms of the brain and the ability of people to develop, I don't think that Europe is behind. The second thing that is very important to run a company, because a company in the end of the day is business that need to make money. Workforce in Europe is much cheaper than in the US. Again, generally, as a general statement. I spoke yesterday with a friend that is a CISO of a global company in the US, and she told me that most of the hiring in her team, unless you need people in country for regulation purpose, also US has a regulation purpose, but unless she needs them or time zone, she will hire people in Europe. She said they are as qualified as the people I can find in the US, and the salary is lesser. And if I need a large organization, it makes a difference. We sold a company called Nozomi Networks, originally from Italy, Switzerland company in the cyber infrastructure or protecting OT, power, railways, to Mitsubishi Electric in September of 25 for $1 billion all cash deal. This company was already profitable probably for 18 months before it was sold, and part of the reason that it was attractive, while there are other companies with in the same domain that are larger in revenue, based the R&D is based either in Israel or in the US, that are still losing a lot of money. So there is also an opportunity that Europe present, that you can build. Let's say you need the same amount of engineers in the same company, and you can get it in a lower cost. It's make a difference, definitely in scale. When you have 5 engineers, it doesn't make a difference. When you start to have 100 engineers, it starts to make a difference.
No, definitely. I've heard that as well, that especially nowadays with the whole virtual, you don't have to be in an office every day, and the culture can be surrounded. Like in some ways, the tech and the coding or the engineering, whatever you need from a worker, that is the culture, right? And that transcends Israel or Europe or America or any other market. What would you say? I want to touch on what you were saying about the founder mindset, because you, as we said, Israelis have the chutzpah and they think of global footprints from day one because they want to get out of the Tel Aviv or Herzliya tech ecosystem right away. What's the European mindset like? European founder mindset, excuse me. What is the typical? And I know we're like speaking generally a lot today, and I think I want to continue that as well, because I don't want you to have to pinpoint specific people. But if we could really dissect the difference between the two, what does the European tech founder look like today?
So I think that there are a few differences. Not all of them are, again, you can put as bad or good. But for sure, because of the opportunity in Europe, as we discussed earlier, you can build a company to be successful in Europe. It will probably not be number 1 nor 3 in the world, but it can be a sizable company, maybe profitable, maybe a good business to build. I think this is when, again, as we said, general statement, most European founders that I met are thinking first, okay, let's take an example, I'm French, so I'll do France. I start to see that there is a good product market fit. I'll go around myself. So Spain, Italy, Switzerland, maybe in places that I can find people that are similar culture, maybe slightly different language. I think this is one thing. And the question, if it's not a bad idea to start like this, because unlike, as we say in Israel, that it's very few customer or the size of the market is very small, but it cannot be the strategy or the plan of the company. So if you meet a company, they say, okay, this is what we do year 1, but year 2, we already start to expand. That's okay. But most of them, I think, are putting it again. You will see US in the plan somewhere, but I think it's quite far, quite in the long horizon rather than in the tangible near future. This is one thing. The second thing, huge difference from Israel and the US. Again, most people, most founders are, and this has to do with what we discussed about funding on the later stage earlier, and also valuation are mostly lower, so you raise less because, again, always people don't want to be fully diluted, and therefore there are much more cautious on expenses and spend. You can see companies in US and Israel that are raising and raising and raising, that's and thinking about growth at any cost. Okay,
Right.
it's not I'll run out of money, I'll raise another round, or people will reach out to me because I have a great idea and they will invest more and more.
Yeah, or it's also, I heard as well from founders, the rule is, if someone's offering to give you money, you'd be stupid not to take it, kind of thing.
That's correct.
Right.
Always blame the investors, but that's okay. But when you come to Europe and you are not in this kind of environment, because this is ecosystem. So what you say is the Israeli ecosystem. We read a lot of those seed rounds of cyber companies without an idea of $60 million round. I don't think that there is any seed round in Europe for a cyber company in $60 million valuation, not equity deployed. So because you are living in a different ecosystem, different environment, you need to be cautious because you don't know, first you raise significantly less, again, in most cases, seed round that what your peer in the US and in Israel raised. And second, you are unsure about how easy will it be for you to raise the next rounds. So you need to be very cautious. So something that probably most likely you will never find in Israel. You can see companies that are raising an A round and they are almost break even, or tell you that soon they will be break even, or when we come to round B, this is not something that in the Israeli ecosystem almost exists. So I think from investor perspective, there are advantages for it. To be cautious is not a bad thing. Obviously, when it's affect growth and expansion and going global, there are trade-offs that you need to make decision of. But that's, I think I would say the two main characteristics that you see, because I don't think that, as I mentioned already several times, I don't think that Europe is short of smart people, people that are with great ideas. So I think those are plenty. Now it's one of the main success reason for Israel. It's the M&A universe here, and people that were acquired in the first company, whether they are the founders or just senior leadership, and then they worked in one of the largest company, either the Big Seven or any other big corporate America that teaches you in many ways how thing to do or what thing not to do. It's the same. It's also a lesson. And then, okay, you do your golden handcuff period and you go and you start a new company. So we have a lot of those, and there are statistics of how many companies came from this company or that company. This cycle is less in existing in Europe. So people are learning in many cases the first lesson. So you will do the same mistake. I was once a CEO, and I'm very often telling CEOs that I'm sitting on the board, go be creative. This mistake I already made 10 years ago. Go do your own mistakes. And if you are lack of this ecosystem, as I feel in Europe, people need to make the mistake by themselves.
No, definitely. That's great. I love those insights. I do want to address somewhat of an elephant in the room when it comes to a conversation between bridging gaps or fostering kind of opportunities between Israel and Europe. Given the last couple of years, there's been concerns about rising anti-Semitism across the continent, either on a kind of street level, but just people kind of experiencing it in their day-to-day life, or going all the way up to a more institutional or business level. I don't want to diminish those concerns, but I also don't want to underplay the significance that the European investments ecosystem has on Israel. So what would you say to people who may look at Europe as a whole, right? I'm not talking any country, I'm not talking any specific thing about it, but just as a concept after the last couple of years, what would you say to people who may be a bit apprehensive given the reported rise in anti-Semitism, either on a street level or a business level?
Okay, so first, this one, I will not give any general statement because I don't know general statement. I can speak only about my own experience in the last few years that I've been with Planven. And just to remind, all our investors are European. So it's not that I'm just giving an idea. This is from first-hand experience. I have not met with any anti-Semitic comment, question, or approach during the time that I've been, and I speak with ecosystem, other VCs, investors, LPs, companies, partners, all the ecosystem. Obviously, what people don't tell me, I don't know, but I'm saying again only what I have first-hand experience. You do hear concern about the situation in Israel, and again, a concern. I'm not saying political view, but more if things that are maybe very obvious to us, but is the ecosystem. If people, if they cannot go to the office, how can they continue to develop the software, or how they continue to run a company, and CEO that maybe has to go to reserve what's happening to the company. So you hear these kind of concerns. However, in the investment decision, again, as much as it was shared with us, I have not met any from both sides, from investors that are investing with our fund, or from companies that we are investing with them. On both sides, we have a lot of Europeans, and I have not met any anti-Semitic concern or comments or anything that will make me feel uncomfortable or worried. I think that the organization, and some of them are government related, or at least corporate related, are doing, I'm sure, in the background their check of what is allowed to them in terms of the EU. Were some noises in the EU in the later part of the Gaza war, in let's say in August, September of last year. Maybe there will be some sanction from the EU on Israel. So these were some issues that were maybe coming, but again, nothing that I can directly connect to any anti-Semitic comment.
Yeah, it's always good and promising to hear. And I think that I also want to take this opportunity to highlight a report that you folks did towards the end of 2025 that actually showed that despite what you may read online, or despite some of the nasty incidents that you hear reported on, actual business partnerships and collaboration with Israeli companies in Europe, whether it's through tech or through workforce or through funding, they are actually increasing. So it's something that, and I can put a link down to the report that I've just mentioned, because it's you and KPMG and another party that was involved. It is a testament to the kind of signal among the noise. So it's promising to hear anecdotally from you, but also just on the broader scale, that it is kind of business as usual. At least maybe it's changing slightly, but the frameworks still exist, and it's not so it's not such a pariah as critics may want to point it out as trying to be. 10 years from now, what will all of this look like in terms of the EU's tech ecosystem, which is growing and taking shape? Israel, of course, 10 years will be a vastly different place. What do you guys see your position looking like in the next decade?
I think that I'm very optimistic. I've been with Planven only for a couple of years, and if I look at our weekly deal flow review over the last 2 years, I see a significant improvement of the quality. Put aside quantity, which is also significant, but in the end of the day, we need to invest in 10, 15 companies, not in hundreds. But there is a huge increase of quality, evidence by the technology that the company present, by the quality of the founders, definitely, and by the inspiration of them to take it global.
It sounds like how you're painting it is that it's going to, the foundations that are being set today are going to flourish, and that it's only going to continue going in that direction, which is promising. If a founder today wanted to start a company that would flourish both in Israel and Israel and Europe, in those 10 years, like 10 years from now, what would you need to tell them today? What foundations would you need to tell them, except aside from looking to go global, all of the things we discussed? What are some of the foundational frameworks that they should put in place today?
I think that, like I say, I would say two things. Like everything that I always recommend, go to things with open eyes. So as we discussed, don't be surprised. You know that Europe has regulation. Make your homework. Come prepared. What regulation you need to be compliant with, and if it suits you, make it prior to go. You understand about the culture differences, so get yourself with the right people, in-house advisor, consultant that can help you to bridge. We spoke a lot about bridges, to bridge this culture gap. Make sure that very often we look at things at different eyes. Culture is not only about to sell to people or the relationship. Sometimes what you think is a great fit in terms of a product, you need to make sure that also for that respective culture, it's also a good fit. So I think those are the things in terms of open eyes. The second thing that I would say, and this is for many years again of experience of running a very large sales organization, stay focused. As we discussed, Europe is a large and divided part of the world. So as you say, US is states, but they all speak the same language, and culture is, again, you'll be surprised how different it can be, but right. less different than what you will see between countries in Europe. So start with where you think is the best fit for your product, and also that there is enough scale. Don't go to the small countries where you cannot find, and make your way up. So start with the 1 or 2 countries and expand it as you grow, and rather to go and try to sell to 30 countries, and you probably most likely will not be successful. So I think those, go in open eyes, understand what is required to make it successful, and focus off your way inside the continent and expand from there.
All right, Eran, wonderful. That was great advice. And I want to close the episode today how I often do, which is with a quick fire round. So I have a few questions here for you. I want you to answer them as quickly and instinctively and shortly as possible. And I'll just throw them at you, and I want to see what your mind brings out. So what's one European country that Israeli founders underestimate?
France.
What's a sector in Europe that you're most excited about right now?
Cyber is picking up very nicely in Europe.
What's one startup mistake that you see over and over again?
Making the product too broad to start with.
What's a red flag that you never ignore?
Founder that speak in the first meeting about an exit.
Will Europe produce the next global tech giant?
I believe so, but it will take some time.
Okay, wonderful. Eran, thank you so much. I have one last question for you, which is, what is the best way for folks listening or watching today to follow you, connect with you, or follow Planven and all the things that you folks are doing over there?
Very good. So my full name, Eran Westman, and my email is Eran, ERAN @planven.com. We have a website of Planven, and we will be happy to connect with those that would like to connect with us.
Wonderful. I'll make sure to put all the links at the bottom so folks can get in touch and follow. Eran, thank you so much for your time today and for your insights. I can't wait to see what happens in Europe in a tech sense, in a society sense, and I can't wait to see the role that Israel will play in that, and the connections that are being fostered. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me.